Welcome to the only YouTube series where you will learn Android concepts in under 15 minutes. And in today's video, navigation. Today we'll challenge ourselves and we'll not do 15 minutes, but we'll try to be under 10 minutes. So let's start. In the previous video we talked about the multiple components in Android: activities, services, broadcast receivers and content providers. In our application flow, we often want to use multiple of these components. And in the old way of programming Android, we used to have different activities for every kind of screen. So how do we then navigate between those multiple activities? Nowadays in Jetpack Compose, I told you, we usually only use a single activity. So we don't have to navigate between activities anymore. However, if you want to send an email or you want to send a text and you want to use a component of a different application, you might still need to be able to communicate between those components. So today we'll start with that, and after that we'll move on to how we navigate in Jetpack Compose. To navigate between components in Android, we use a concept called intents, which facilitate inter-component communication. Now there's two types of intents. We have explicit and implicit intents. The explicit intents are when we define which component or which app we're going to navigate towards. Implicit intents, on the other hand, is when we don't exactly know where we want to navigate to, but we know what we want to do. For example, if you want to show a location on the map, you are not exactly sure which application is used by the user to display locations. So you will create an implicit intent where you'll just say like, show this on a map. And the Android system will try to figure out which application best satisfies this intent. So let's look at how we can actually make these intents. We can create an explicit intent as follows. We create a variable which will hold the intent that we define. We pass the context of our application. And then we specify our target class. Where do we want the intent to go to? You might also want to append some data or some extra values to your intent. In the case we want to download something from a URL, we might want to attach the URL, and we can do this using .apply and then curly brackets. Finally, we can use this intent in a function like start activity or start service to start a component in which we pass the intent we just created. Now secondly, if we want to create an implicit intent where we don't specify the target class, but instead we want to send some text to some application that can use it. First again, we create the intent. We define the action and we put a text message as extra. We also define the type of this text message, in this case, plain text. Then we are not sure which activity start activity will use. So we surround it in a try catch clause. And this basically tells Android, try to do this, and if it doesn't work, do this. So in the catch clause we define what kind of error we are expecting. In this case, the activity not found error. And if we get this error, we can write some code on what to do. In the very essence, this is how you create intents. You created an explicit intent and an implicit intent. And that's all you need to know for now. If you want me to make a video that goes deeper into these intents, please let me know in the comments down below. We will continue on to how we can do navigation in Jetpack Compose. So I briefly mentioned that Jetpack Compose only uses a single activity to build its application. So if we only have one activity, how can we then navigate between two different screens? Well, for this, Jetpack Compose has its own composable. And these navigation composables basically consist of two parts. A navigation controller, handling all the actions, and a navigation host. The navigation controller is the central API to the navigation component. It is stateful, so it remembers what has happened. It holds the backstack, so that it remembers which screens we have been to. The navigation host connects the navigation controller to a navigation graph, basically the Google Maps of our application. Which screen is held at which location or which route. So how do we actually create these items in our app? Firstly, we define the nav controller. I usually like to do this in my main activity. And we can create this nav controller using val nav controller is remember nav controller. And the remember word here reminds us that this is indeed a stateful component. We want to make sure that in the application we only have one nav controller. Otherwise we might get unexpected behavior. Having the navigation controller in our main activity ensures that it is at the top level and allows us to pass it to whatever is downwards of the hierarchy. Now that we have defined our navigation controller, we can pass it to a nav host. In the nav host, we also define a start destination. Once we have defined our start destination, we can start to list all the destinations in the list of our navigation host. And we do this using the composable keyword. Then we define the route, that's the string, which we use to get to that composable. And then within curly brackets or within the lambda function, we can define what has to happen when we navigate to this route. In this case, we want to show a composable that we made before, namely the profile composable. We can now use our nav controller to navigate to any of these two destinations. But now what happens if we want to navigate to a profile of a specific user? Then we have to pass the user ID in some sort of way. In this case, we can add to the route a slash and then within curly brackets some sort of value. Now by default the type of this value is a string. So if we want to pass something else that is not a string, we have to define this argument type. The argument that we pass can then be used in the lambda function by reading out the backstack entry. And we can pass it to our profile composable using backstack entry dot arguments dot get string and then the name we gave to our argument, in this case user ID. When we navigate, the new screen gets added to a thing called the backstack. The backstack keeps track of all the screens we have been to, and this allows us to press the back button and go to the previous screen. Now as programmers, we are also allowed to manipulate this backstack. Say for example that you allow your user to log out. If you do not do anything with your backstack in that case, pressing back might mean that you go back into a screen of the logged in state, which is weird because you logged out. So when a user logs out, you might want to clear the backstack so that the user cannot go back. Finally, let's talk about some good practices with our navigation. Because just like any component in our app, we would like to be able to test it. To be able to test navigation, or any class in that matter, it needs to be decoupled from other classes. It is very tempting to pass the navigation controller directly to our screens. But this means we couple our screens to the navigation as a whole, which is exactly what we don't want to do. So instead of putting in the nav controller, we can put in the navigation call instead. Now it is decoupled and this allows us to test our navigation, which we will go deeper into in our testing lecture here in Flemings Bay. So in this video we've discussed two things. First of all, we've discussed that we use intents to communicate between different components. Second, I've shown you that we can use the nav host and nav controller to navigate in between screens in Jetpack Compose. I will link an example application in the bio below, but that also means that you're now all set up to start playing around with navigation in your own apps. I wish you a lot of luck and I hope to see you in the next video.